All right, hey, what's up guys? Coach Mac, Play Fast Football. All right, today I'm going to do a video on what exactly FIB or FSL is, what does it mean, and why are people talking about it so much. Make sure you check out some of our partners. Dome Hats, which is the headwear company I use. This is my white Play Fast hat with our Play Fast logo on the back, snapback hat. You can customize your own hats with their online hat builder, so you can change the color of the panels, change the logo, change the writing on the side, change the back from snapback to Velcro to fit it. All customizable, which means you're creating your own hat. Every hat is a story. Make sure you let Dome Hats tell your hat story. Baker Sporting Goods, the company I use for my coaches' gear, our players' gear, our uniforms. If we ever have any online store for fans, we use Baker Sporting Goods, so make sure you check out Baker's. JustPlayFB, which is the digital software I use to diagram plays. If I'm going to do webinars, clinics, anything for my Patreon site, I draw and diagram using JustPlay. It's a more powerful presentation, a better way to educate your players on your playbook and your game plan, so check out JustPlay. GameStrat, sideline replay system we use. If you're looking for a highly reliable, highly affordable sideline replay system, make sure you check out GameStrat. And I will also have a giveaway from GameStrat linked into the championship game this Monday night, so make sure you check me out on Twitter at CoachMac8740 for that. DifferenceUSA, the ultimate striking machine. We have one in our weight room in the off-season we use. Work on elbows in, thumbs up, where your eyes need to be, hand placement, hips, how you come out of your stance, how you strike, all the things you need to do to become better at striking. Different coils, you can change the strength of the coil, so as your kids get stronger, it provides more resistance for them to leverage the pad in. So as they develop, you can also change the resistance in the coil. So check out DifferenceUSA. HighandTight, it's a ball security training aid. It's got sensors and panels that make an auditory beep when you have the ball in the right position with the right pressure. So when you've got all the proper points of pressure and the ball in the right position, it will beep. When it beeps, you know that's high and tight. That's how you need to carry the football. So it creates muscle memory for kids. So make sure you check out HighandTight. Ball security is job security. All right, so there's been a lot of talk. I've seen a lot of talk recently on FIB, FSL, and one of the reasons, I guess, the Ohio State-Clemson game, if you watch that game, I watched some of it, not all of it, but Ohio State was doing some things to Clemson. Clemson was having a hard time lining up. Now a lot of guys are saying it was FIB, FSL stuff, so we're going to go into that today. So FIB means formation into boundary. FSL means formation into sideline. Synonymous in my opinion. It means the same thing. All right, it's a formation to the short side of the field. They're putting their strength into the short side of the field. So what that does for defenses a lot of times, so if the ball was on a hash mark, you'd have a field side and a short side boundary side. Okay? So when the ball's on a hash mark, you have, approximately 36 yards in high school, about 36 yards to the field, 17 yards to the boundary. When the offense puts their formational strength into the sideline or into the boundary, that's what FIB means, formation into boundary. Now, why is that something that you have to deal with, something you have to be concerned with? A lot of times defenses are field-orientated defenses, so they set certain players to the field. If you look at this dollar sign right here, if this was a 4-3 team and this was a Sam linebacker, all right, they set the Sam linebacker to the field. They don't want him traveling into the boundary. They set him to the field. When you then set your formation strength, which right now they've got a tight end and a flanker, so they've got two receivers here and only one receiver on this side. So they've set their offensive formation strength into the boundary. You now have a weak safety on that side. Depending on how teams play their defense, if they're a field-orientated defense and they put the weak safety away from the Sam all the time, this weak safety is normally a player, all right, that you'll hear the term on the roof, all right, or you'll hear the term high. He is normally a player that is on the roof high. He's used to being on a hash mark or playing from depth. He's not a guy, a lot of times in the defense, that is used to being a D-gap flat force player, all right, predominantly. The Sam linebacker to the field is a guy, all right, who is normally, he's the guy that they want more involved in the run game. All right, he's the guy that they want being their flat player. The Sam defender is usually never a guy that plays on the roof or a guy that plays high. He's always a down player. All right, so what happens is when offenses set their personnel into the boundary, they start to give field defenses, all right, a little bit of trouble, because a lot of times within the makeup of these players, they're only taught to play certain coverages and do certain things. So now the offense is trying to get the defense into a situation where, number one, maybe they can only play certain coverages into the boundary. So the age-old, for quarter, half teams, or teams that used to set their strength, the Sam to the field, and try to play quarters to the field and half to the boundary. For ages, and it's still to this day probably one, teams that used to get into this situation, cover 3 was normally one of the standard checks. So cover 3 would involve you having to take that weak safety and move him down, and then take that free safety and move him more somewhere middle of the formation, split the number ones. All right. So teams that were formation into the boundary, or FSL, formation into the sideline, they would watch your film and see that, do you have a coverage check for formation into the sideline, formation into the boundary? If they know that, they will trade you, shift you, or even line up in that set. If you don't travel, all right, your free safety or your down safety, weak safety, strike, whip, however you want to look at those guys, whatever you want to call them, you can call them whatever you want. If you don't travel them and they stay on one side, when you get formation into the boundary, do you have a coverage check like cover 3? Now teams will get you formation into the boundary, get you to check 3 deep, and now they'll attack all the places they want to attack in 3 deep because they know how to get you in it. Okay, so that was always one of the age-old things for field defenses, is you only had certain checks into the boundary versus certain formations. The offense would then put that formation into the boundary to get you to check into that defense, and they would then attack either the coverage structure, the numbers in the angles into the sideline. They would run the ball into the boundary if you couldn't get lined up or match the numbers, or they would throw certain pass concepts, all right, depending on college hashes and high school hashes, that the coverages were conducive to using the coverages or the spacing against, all right, the defense. So formation into the boundary is a way to try and dictate to the defense how you would like them to play. All right, the other thing teams used to do is they used to set the formation, all right, they would set the formation to the field. So they might set the tight end to the field, get you to declare all your coverages to the field, however you do it, and then they would trade, all right, the tight end over there, and now they would create, after a shift or a trade, they would create a formation into the boundary and get you to play the things that you wanted to play. All right, teams that used to use a lot of movement, like in one back. This happened to us when we first started playing our 4-2-5 stuff to the field. We had a team that would come out and set trips to the field. We would make our coverage checks, do everything we need. They would trade the tight end to the boundary. After the tight end traded, they would motion slot receiver across, and they would end up in trips into the boundary or into the sideline. Okay? When we first started playing our 4-2-5 stuff, we had a field side safety and a weak side safety. The field side safety played what we thought were most of the read side, strong side coverages, and the weak side safety played the away side coverages. Anytime they traded us or shifted us and put formation into the boundary, we ended up finding out that we could only play certain things because we never taught our weak safety how to play 3-by-1 sets. Because in practice, the way we set things to the field, if we've got those coverages to the field, the weak safety was never involved in playing to the trip side. So teams would shift or trade and motion us into this look, and we ended up finding out that our weak safety could only play 1 or 2 coverages. So every time they did that to us, we were stuck playing that coverage. And then when the weak safety would come to the sideline, and we'd talk about it, and he'd say, well, coach, we didn't really rep that enough in practice. I haven't been to the 3 receiver side. So now we had to go back and look at not only our practice structure, but we had to go back and look at a different way to possibly do things, because in this field boundary world, teams were now starting to attack us into the boundary. All right, so one of the things that we did, and this is going back almost 10 years, all right, and I posted something on Twitter today, and I asked a question, is there, what's the difference between being different, being unconventional? Is unconventional something that's different, all right, and it's not sound, so it makes it unconventional? Is it something that's different, but it's sound in all its principles? What is the difference, or different, unconventional? So, to me, one of the first things we did, and this was just because I needed to answer it for myself, we changed from playing Sam, strike, whip, 3 safeties. We started playing with a safety that was always on the right side and a safety that was always on the left side, and the free safety was the only guy that traveled. So what we did was we built into our practice plans, we found a way to play these guys as hybrid players, and now what we did was we taught them how to be back in coverage, and we taught them how to be down, all right? Or if you want to look up, down, however you want to look at it, high, low, okay? This could be back, this could be up, this could be high, and we also taught them how to be down or low. So now what we did essentially is they had to learn all the versions of read side coverages and away side coverages. Okay? And what we did was we found body types that were very similar in nature. Okay? And we didn't travel in field and boundary. We left them left and right. We found kids that were very similar in athletic ability, very similar in size, very similar in the physicality of forcing or playing runs and playing athletically on a hash mark. Now, why do we do that? Because most of our kids playing those roles were very similar anyways. We don't recruit, we don't give scholarships, I don't have a chance to go out and find a field Sam linebacker from all across the country, find the right size, speed, skill set to be the field Sam or the weak side whip, all right? We don't do that. We play with the kids that are here. It's high school football. Most of my kids that were playing those positions were very similar in nature. Yes, we had years where this kid was more physical and he was more athletic, but once we went to a right side safety and a left side safety, we started finding kids that were almost identical in skill set and athletic ability. And the biggest thing was we made sure that this guy to the field had the ability, all right, to play high in coverage. So we needed them to be physical, so we found our kids that we thought were more physical safeties, but better athletes. And we started finding and training our kids a little bit differently. And the reason we did that is so that when teams wanted to do certain things to us, so if teams went pro on this side, and we lined up, and we're always a quarter half team, okay? So for us, standard, back in the days of 21 personnel, we would play quarters to this side. All right, so this side would play true quarters, and this side would play some type of half technique, and this right safety, if he had a single receiver out here, obviously he'd be on the line. If he had a single receiver, he had coverages that he could play to the single receiver side or the away side. So he could play what we called sky or what we call cloud or what we call hard, right? When the teams traded the tight end, so when the tight end got up and traded to this side, all right, he walked off and let's say he walked on. All we did was we just moved our free safety to the other side. Our free safety declared and just made a Liz call, which told this safety to then go, all right, down. And now we just reset everything and we played quarters here. And this side went back to playing half. And now remember, this kid as a hybrid player has the ability to play high or low. So now on the backside, we taught that kid how to play single side, away side coverages. So now all he does is redefine the picture that he's got. Free safety says, hey, check Liz, all right? Liz read. This kid is to the single side. He now tells the corner, hey, check sky, because he knows to the single how we want to play. All right? So now when we got this, all we did was we moved to free safety, and he was the only guy that traveled. We then had to teach our Will and our Mike how to be hybrid linebackers. All right? So this is going back 10, 12 years ago, and the reason I bring up the unconventional or the different standpoint is now you're finding more positionless hybrid players on the field trying to match the tempo and the space and the athletes and the speed of the offense. So hybrid players and positionless defense has now become a big topic. 10 years ago, it was almost unconventional. So when I told people that I was playing a right safety and a left safety, and I was teaching them to play read side and away side, back then it was kind of frowned upon to say, no, you should really play with a Sam and a whip. You should really play with a field side guy and a boundary guy. And I explained all the problems that we were having, and they said, well, just have an FIB check. And then I said, well, when I go to the FIB check, teams are attacking me into the boundary. I don't want to necessarily have to check FIB when that's what the offense wants me to do. So if I train these kids to be both, yes, there's a little bit more teaching involved. Yes, I've got to find the right body types that can do both. All right? Those are the issues that I have the same issue if I have to teach the Sam, find a body type for the Sam and teach them read side. Okay? But you teach them less coverages. Okay, now what's happening is we have to teach a few more coverages, so what do you got to do? You got to take your coverage playbook and maybe narrow it down. So now we only have 2 ways to play tight end flanker or 2 removed or 3 by 1. Instead of 4 or 5 ways, we only have 2 ways to play it. But now they have to learn read side and away side, so we have less coverages to play because we've got to teach more assignments. Okay, but here's what it ended up doing. It ended up being when we got shift trades and motions, now we were in position to play whatever we wanted. So if they then, like I said with that one back scenario, if they motioned the guy from here over to here and it made it trips on this side, this guy knew how to play 3 by 1 coverages. So all the free safety would have to do is check the coverage now that there's 3 over there and say, hey, check triangle. All right, hey, check stress. hey, check solo, whatever the check was, and this kid could play it because he had to learn both, and this kid to the away side could play it. He could go from being read side and a quarters down D-gap flat player to all of a sudden maybe being back on a hash mark. We could do those things because they never changed sides. They just changed whether they were up or back or if they were read side or away side. So it gave us the ability. What I had to do was go back and look and say, okay, do I want to limit my playbook, teach extra things to kids to have to get them to learn to be field side and boundary side, read side and away side, but they never move. The free safety is the only guy that moves. So now they're learning more, but they never move, and they're always prepared to be field side and away side. So originally when I started doing that and talking about that, it wasn't in vogue. It wasn't something that was going on a lot. So it's something that I had to research myself and figure out, okay, what are the pluses and minuses? Can I get this accomplished? I looked at the plus and minuses. I looked at the kids that were playing safety for me. I said, you know what? We're going to do this. We're going to try it. We're going to give it a shot. All right? We've been playing defense that way for the last 10 years. Now, the reason I bring up different, unconventional, is a lot of times in the football community, what happens at the higher levels is always what's looked at as the sounding board for the levels underneath that. So you had to see people doing it at a higher level to make it sound or conventional. So this offseason I started studying some mid front stuff and some tight front stuff. And one of the things I came across was Georgia playing the mid front, Kirby Smart. I talked about that in a different video. And what he said was originally, in some of their nickel personnel packages, okay, in some of their nickel personnel packages originally when they were playing, all right, like that mid-front stuff, they always set their nickel to the field, and they always sent that extra player into the boundary. With the college hash marks, teams were going trips into the boundary, knowing that the nickel was going to stay to the field, and they were attacking Alabama at that time with their personnel into the boundary. Okay? So after getting beat by formation into the boundary and different things into the boundary, in Georgia's mid package, or in Alabama's when Kirby Smart was the defense coordinator, now he's at Georgia, what they ended up doing was they traveled the nickel, and the nickel in that package, base package, all right, I know guys are going to say, no, they play it different ways. I know they do. Base package in that mid-front, they traveled the nickel and into the boundary if the strength was there, so that they put the jack away from the passing strength all the time. All right, so they traveled that nickel into the boundary, put the jack away from the passing strength, and now went ahead and played their normal 3x1 checks and their normal coverages guide. The coverages that they play with the nickel to the trips where they want them and the jack away from the trips where they want them. Okay, so after getting beat by formation into the boundary, their rules of setting the nickel to the field and the jack away changed, and all of a sudden the nickel started traveling to the passing strength and the jack went away from the passing strength because they were getting beat by certain things 3x1 into the boundary, and because of the college hashes they were starting to get beat by some vertical things when they had, you know, the jack, when the star or the nickel was stuck over here and the jack was over here. All right, teams were scheming Alabama. They were figuring out ways in certain package throw. They would get into personnel groups to get certain groups on the field, and then they would go FIB or FSL to get Alabama into what they wanted to get them into, and then they would attack from there. All right, so even the best, like Alabama and Kirby Smart now at Georgia, they had to adapt to what the offenses were doing to them. So they adapted to traveling the nickel and putting the jack away from the nickel. All right, so that's what they adapted to. Now, once the big dogs adapted to that, now that becomes a theory that most people think, oh, that's sound, we can do that. Why? Because the best are doing it. But for the longest time, if they weren't doing that and you told somebody you wanted to travel a guy into the boundary, they would look at you and say, Coach, you can't do that. Just check 3 deep or check. You don't want that kid into the boundary. You don't want that kid to the field. You have to, sometimes in football, you've got to be able to solve your own problems and go out and figure out what works best for you. Okay? So we solved, at least for me, the problems that I was seeing structurally, we solved them by playing left safety and right safety. And only the free safety traveling to passing strength. If they put the strength to the boundary, I put the free safety into the boundary. I set the coverage into the boundary. And then we always knew that there were certain checks to the field based on formation that we didn't want to play to the field. So 3x1 into the boundary, I'm okay setting the free safety into the boundary. But he's got to play a certain 3x1 check into the boundary that doesn't get me, all right, outnumbered or leveraged to the field. Okay, so I would never take my backside safety and use him into the boundary to the trip side. That's not a coverage I would play. So yes, we had certain checks with formation into the boundary, but I was okay setting the free safety into the boundary and setting the strength of the coverage into the boundary. Because when you really look at it, and this is a question that I've asked a couple different people today, all right, if you line up to formations and you split the ball down the middle, all right, so here's the middle, there's the ball. If you line up to formations and the formation happens to be 2 on that side, 1 on this side, 2 backs, whatever it is, okay, if you're lining up to formations, is FIB or FSL really still a thing? So in other words, if I have the ability to set my free safety into the boundary and play quarters on this side the way I want to, and then go ahead and play, let's just say, for argument's sake, sky coverage on this side. If I have the ability to set my free safety into the boundary, to play the strength of the formation, to play quarters there, sky here, is it really FIB anymore? FIB is truly something that affects field defenses that won't move people or declare strengths into the boundary. So FIB and FSL, formation into boundary, formation into the sideline, is really something that's more in existence because the defense won't match the personnel into the boundary. So now for me, when we're looking at teams that are FIB or FSL, if I'm okay setting the free safety and the strength of the coverage to the boundary, now all I'm looking for is tendencies, runs to the boundary, passes to the boundary. Now I'm looking at formation as more of a tendency deal than I am a formation that requires special attention because I'm setting it like every other coverage. So all I'm telling my free safety to do is see the receivers. Where are there more? There's more over there, you make a Liz call. Who are they? They're a tight end and a flanker, you make a quarters call. That's all I'm teaching them. It doesn't matter whether it's boundary, it doesn't matter whether it's field. So in my mind, and I know this is different, but in my mind, there is no more FIB. I'm matching that formation. I'm playing that formation the same into the boundary as I would to the field because I'm traveling my free safety into the boundary and I'm allowing my 2 other safeties to be hybrid, strong and weak players, read and away players, up and down players, high and low players. So my free safeties, the only guy that's traveling. So we're matching the strength into the boundary. So my question to people is, if you match the strength into the boundary, and like Alabama and Kirby Smart started doing, if you put the nickel into the boundary to trips, is that really, other than labeling things, is that really formation into the boundary anymore? Yes, by label it is, but if it doesn't get you to check to something specific, all right, and you don't have to worry about FIB checks, you just play your coverage to the formation, now you've kind of eliminated FIB, FSL as something that the offense can go to or shift or trade or motion you into. Now you're still going to get teams, we still label FIB or FSL. We still look for tendencies into the boundary and to the field. We still look for tendencies in the run game and the passing game to the strength and away from the strength. We're looking at all the same tendencies, but we're not really treating that formation as a different grouping for FIB or FSL. We just put the free safety into the boundary. Okay, so unconventional, I don't know. Sound for us, yes, because we do all the same things that we want to do and we avoid, all right, the numbers of the structural issue and coverages. Okay, we play with hybrid safeties that have to do both, so maybe there's a mismatch into the boundary if you want to say that that kid's not as much of a run player as the field side is, but the way we try to train our kids, they have to be very similar. So, you know, the matchups may be physical. The matchups may be one kid's better on a hatch than the other kid, but the matchups will never be we can't line up, and the matchups will never be getting me into a certain check that you want to attack in the run game or in the passing game, because I don't have to do that. I can just match the formation. So we started putting the free safety, over 10 years ago, we started putting the free safety to the boundary, matching the formation to the boundary. Like every other team, we've had success. We've not had success. Is it because of the theory? No, it's because of who we've got, who they've got, how good we coach it, how good they coach it. But it's never been theoretical. It's never been something that by doing that we're killing ourselves to the field or we're killing ourselves to the boundary. All right? It allowed us to match and practice everything we wanted to practice. Pro to the field and pro to the boundary were the same thing to us. Maybe the tendencies were different with what we were expecting, but our alignment and our coverage and our formation recognition made those formations the same, which then got us back to less practice time, not more practice time. So originally, with the hybrid safeties, we were teaching more, but once we got formations lined up the same, field and boundary, now you're starting to see less teaching during the week because I don't have to teach that kid, hey, that's a check, that's FIB, that's FSL. All I had to teach them was, hey, when they're FIB, you're playing quarters, you got to watch for this. Hey, to the field, if you're playing sky, you got to watch for this. All we did was we worked on tendencies. So, long story short, that's what FIB and FSL means. That's what it is. Offenses do it to get certain matchups and attack into the boundary. This past week with Ohio State Clemson, they showed several clips on social media. People are talking about Clemson couldn't get lined up, couldn't match the personnel groups, the tempo got to them, the either unbalanced or formations into the boundary got to them. Yeah, and a lot of that might be true because if they had field or boundary things and they didn't travel anybody and they didn't declare strength into the boundary, now they're stuck. All right, alignment issues, I don't really know why you'd have alignment issues if they put the strength into the boundary and you're a field team. Just play your guys to the field and then make your adjustments on the front or the coverage. But that became a big topic. That's what FIB is. That's what FSL is. That's how we got beat originally in 10 years ago or 12 years ago when I started playing 4-2-5 stuff. I played with a field side Sam and a weak side whip. All right, we were really 4-3 in nature before we became a 3 safety team. And teams shifted, traded, motion, got us into things into the boundary that we had to check to, and then they attacked us into the boundary. How do we get away from that? 3 true safeties, 1 true free safety, 2 safeties that are both up and back, high and low. All right, so they're not a field Sam or a nickel. They're both safeties that have to be on a hash, have to be down, D-gap run support. They have to be able to be a flat player and a hash mark player. They got to be able to play palms or 2 read. So they've got to play up and back, high and low. All right, and eventually that got us to a point where we eliminated teams just straight up attacking you into the boundary because of a certain structure. So I hope this video helps. If anything, I hope it describes what FIB, FSL are. Hopefully it describes to you if you've had some of these issues, maybe it gives you a different way to play it. If you want nothing to do with playing it that way and you want to stay the way, that's fine. Every time I do a video on this channel, I always tell you these are just my opinions, my ideas, how we've done some things, how we've handled some things. More than one way to skin a cat. Do it however you feel is best for you and your players. All right, results are results. All right, so whatever process you think gets you to the end results, use that process. If you're looking for a change, hopefully this helps. Remember to subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on so you know every time we do a video or we go live. Make sure you leave a thumbs up or a thumbs down whether you like this or dislike it. It helps me understand the content or the teaching approach to the content that you want to see. All right, it helps me understand how to teach it better. If we're not doing a good job, leave a message. Every message that I see on my end, I try to respond to, all right? Thanks for everything you guys do for the channel. Now you know the videos are live if you didn't know it before because you heard the bell ring twice. I'm in my planning period. I don't have a class, so I'm not in here doing this while there's a class in the weight room or somewhere else. This is my planning period. So thanks for everything you guys do for Play Fast. Got some big things coming up that I'm trying to get done. All right, in the new year, we want to do some things new and exciting and not do everything the way we've been doing. So thanks for everything you do. Remember, you won't play well until you play fast, and I'll see you next time.